Hello gamers! Today we will be ranking / reviewing every single Ratchet & Clank game in the franchise. There are, I believe, 16 Ratchet & Clank games in total, and this list will include all of the main series games, all of the spin-offs, and even the 2 mobile games, which I know a lot of YouTubers tend to skip. These games will be ranked by gameplay, story, replayability, music, and a bunch of other things such as graphics, level design, level diversity, weapons, game modes, and just overall some nitpicks here and there. Now please understand, all of my rankings are my opinion. I have been a fan of the franchise for over 15 years, so I do tend to know my stuff, but I'm also more of just a game enjoyer than most people, so I can have a fun time playing almost any game. That being said, you are entitled to your own opinion, as it will likely not match my rankings, so please don't hate me too much in the comments for putting Secret Agent Clank in S tier. I'm kidding. Please enjoy this video, and if you enjoy the Ratchet & Clank games, consider subscribing to the channel for more Ratchet & Clank and PlayStation content in general. It helps me out a ton, because I really have a fun time doing this, and it's awesome to know that you guys enjoy watching it. And yeah, please enjoy.
Alright, let's start off this ranking with Ratchet & Clank 2002. This game is an amazing start to the series with awesome planets to travel to, with many different weapons to blow shit up. The story of this game is pretty good, with Ratchet & Clank meeting and beginning the search for Quark, who's the only one who can stop Chairman Drek from destroying the galaxy one planet at a time. After they find Quark, he ends up betraying Ratchet & Clank. They end up fighting over everything, including who's the bigger threat, Quark or Drek. Ratchet doesn't care about Drek and wants to find Quark to get his revenge. After Ratchet finally gets revenge on Quark, he realizes Clank was actually right and Drek needs to be stopped. Drek is the bigger threat. He's literally threatening the galaxy. Then they defeat Drek and they kind of just become lifelong friends after that. But there was a lot of bickering throughout the story, which I thought was good character development, but at times Ratchet was kind of just a dick.
Get off of me, you idiot!
The weapon variety in this game is amazing, with 15 different weapons to use, like the Blaster, which is your average pistol, the Pyrocitor as a flamethrower, the Devastator as a rocket launcher, and so much more amazing weapons. This game also has lots of gadgets and different play styles, like hoverboard races, ship combat, and even Clank missions, where you can walk around and do things as Clank. It's just more ways to keep the gameplay fun and fresh, and I love that. There's also a massive variety of enemies who have their own respective planets. This is a trend that future games kind of abandoned later in the series, so I respect that this game has that. When it comes to replayability for this game, it is so replayable just due to the fact at how much fun the characters and environments are, plus when isn't it fun to blow shit up. The only downside is the controls are a bit harder to get used to than the future games, and it's also a lot harder just due to the amount of health you have. Now, we can't talk about Ratchet & Clank without talking about the soundtrack. The soundtrack in this game is off the charts. I mean, listen to this. You cannot tell me that these aren't bangers. The Ratchet & Clank PS2 era itself has some of the greatest soundtracks of all time, and this game really shows that. This game is easily an A-tier Ratchet & Clank game, and overall I'd give it about an 8.5 out of 10. There are a lot of improvements that could be made, but for the first game in the franchise, it is beautiful. Now, let's move on and talk about Ratchet & Clank Going Commando. Ratchet & Clank Going Commando is the epitome of what a sequel should be for a franchise. Anything and everything that was potentially an issue in the first game was fixed and improved in this game. The gameplay is a lot more fun, with 24 weapons that can also increase in level, making them more powerful and gain additional mods. There is also the addition of strafing, so you can sideways walk while shooting your weapons, making combat a million times easier. There are also more game modes, such as glider sections, space dogfights, hover bike races, as well as arena missions to help with grinding more bolts. The story in this game is pretty good as well. We get hired from the CEO of a weapons company named Megacorp to find a secret experiment that was stolen. We find it and return it to them. We are then warned by Angela that it's evil and we shouldn't have given it back and it cannot be released to the public. It ends up getting released to the public anyways, and yeah, it's not good. We find and locate the CEO of Megacorp, and yeah, it ends up being Quark disguised as him, trying to frame Ratchet & Clank for the entire incident. I kind of think the Quark twist is kind of stupid, but it's not awful, and the story before that is really good. So I think the story overall is still really good. This game features a lot of different planets and environments and enemies as well. There are also a lot of different boss fights, some being optional like Chainblade and the B2 Brawler, What That Brain Do, and others being required fights like the 3 fights with the Thug for Less leader and also the Thief. These boss fights are really fun and they're never too difficult. Well, except for the Snivelac one, but we're not going to talk about that. This game is definitely replayable a few times with it still being really fun, but after a while with all the extra gameplay styles, they tend to get a little bit tedious to replay over and over again, when I personally just prefer to shoot things. The music in this game is so good. Every level just has you taking a minute just to look at the scenery and go, this game is easily an S-tier Ratchet & Clank game and is a 9.5 out of 10 overall. Probably publicly known as the best Ratchet & Clank game.
Alright, now we're going to move on to Ratchet & Clank Up Your Arsenal, which is another perfect entry in the series, and is my personal favorite in the franchise. This game has a more focused approach on combat, as well as providing linear designs throughout the levels, but that doesn't diminish from the experience. The game has even more weapons, with some returning from the first and second games, and this time they can be upgraded all the way up to level 5, which pretty much from here on out becomes a staple of the franchise, except for Ratchet Deadlocked, which kind of changes it a bit. This game doesn't have any missions like ship missions or hoverbike races, but it does have Quark vid comics, which are okay, but luckily they are skippable in challenge mode, which is something that I can really appreciate, because it makes the game more replayable. The game's story is pretty good, but also very simple. Dr. Nefarious wants to turn the entire galaxy into robots, and Ratchet and the Q-Force, led by Quark, who was a monkey at one point, work together to destroy Nefarious and save the galaxy. This game features a wide variety of new planets as well as some returning planets from the Solana galaxy, though a lot of the returning planets are very limited and are kind of just used as Galactic Ranger sections, which I know a lot of people don't like. But even though these levels are repeats or they all have one linear path, I think with these limitations, the levels are still very fun, memorable, and have a lot of charm to them. I truly believe that this game and Deadlocked are the most replayable games in the entire franchise, with sections that can be cleared very quickly if you know what you're doing, and the best part is there isn't too many other missions to take you out of it like Going Commando has and Ratchet & Clank the first one has. It's just very combat focused. The cutscenes in this game are also the best in the franchise, really capitalizing on the adult humor and innuendos that Insomniac was aiming for in the early days of the Ratchet & Clank franchise.
It was mating season. How could I have known she was your sister?
Like, I've watched these cutscenes over 100 times each, and they still make me laugh. They're so funny. And again, even though I did say that Going Commando beats this game in terms of music, it truly is way too close to honestly pick which one has a better soundtrack. This game's soundtrack is ridiculous. Like, they were in the fucking studio jamming out, dude. Like, their whole studio had to have been on fire. Anyways, this game's overall ranking is an S tier with a 9.7 out of 10. This is by far my favorite game in the franchise, so I am very biased towards it. Now, on to Ratchet Deadlocked. Ratchet Deadlocked is the very first spin-off of the entire Ratchet & Clank franchise, taking the arena and combat sections from Ouya and turning it up to the max. Deadlocked removes Clank as a movement option and a companion, and kind of just benches him into just being part of the story. But they do not leave Ratchet entirely alone. He gets 2 robot companions, Merc and Green, who assist him in combat while also being able to use gadgets to help get around. There are also ship missions and Landstalker missions as well to keep some variety in the game. The story of this game begins with Ratchet, Clank, and Owl being captured and forced to fight to the death with other gladiators in a real-life live-action TV series called Dread Zone, led by Gleeman Vox. Ratchet's mission is to find and defeat Vox so they can escape this treacherous death show. That's basically the entire story. This game has so much action-packed content in each level, with some returning enemies in levels as well as some entirely new species to be found. This game does feature the least amount of weapons, but it makes up for it by adding alpha and omega mods, which can be added to your weapon to make them even more busted. Whether it's more ammo, a lava mod, an ice mod, anything like that to make your weapon even better. And it honestly doesn't matter because once you get the scorpion flail and you put the ice mod on it, the game is over. You basically beat the game. That weapon is so busted. The music in this game is also really good, but it's not as atmospheric and smooth as it is in the prior 3 games. I can't say it's not a banger of a soundtrack though, because it is. This game's simple design, concept, and gameplay makes it the most likely game in the franchise to be replayed again and again by fans. This game is an overall 9 out of 10 and is definitely a high A tier game. Moving on to an interesting title now, we have Ratchet & Clank going mobile. I don't have a lot to say about this game, but I really like that this game introduced Ratchet & Clank to the mobile gaming market, and it was honestly such a slam dunk at doing that. This game was really good for what it was, a mobile version of Ratchet & Clank, which instead of being the normal 3D game, this was a 2D side-scroller. But it honestly featured a lot of weapons, and some of them being entirely new to this series, like the Defragmenter and the Circuit Breaker, I think it's called. When it comes to the story was very basic. Ratchet & Clank were basically sucked into a Secret Agent Clank vid comic, and they have to find their way out. That's honestly it. There's not much to be told. The crazy thing about this game is that it had an arena, many collectible titanium bolts, and even an unlockable rhino for getting all those titanium bolts. These things are all Ratchet & Clank staples, but it's insane to me that they were able to pull all of this off on such limited hardware. I mean, phones back in the day were nothing like they are now. Even though this game is really short, with an average 100% playthrough taking about 2 hours, it was still a very enjoyable time. It unfortunately doesn't have that much replayability though. This game is definitely a C tier Ratchet & Clank game. I don't hate it. It's very enjoyable, but it's also very limited for what it is. Next up on the list we have Size Matters. Oh, Size Matters.
That's what she said!
I have a ton of respect for this game and what it was and what it did for the franchise. Size Matters was the first portable 3D Ratchet & Clank game in the franchise. It was exclusive to the PSP, but was later ported to the PS2. This game is known as one of the worst games in the franchise by many, many fans, and I definitely understand the complaints, but I also think people are just being a little bit too hard on it. This game was made by High Impact Games, and it was not directly made by Insomniac, and I think for the resources that they had, they actually did a pretty dang good job making a Ratchet & Clank game for an entirely new console. So I think people need to give them a bit more credit. Size Matters has a variety of levels, weapons, and minigames like the other games before it. The issue is that all the minigames are tedious and they tend to go on for way too long. The levels are actually pretty fun at times though, but there are some that are a pain in the ass, especially when it's like a second playthrough on challenge mode. And the main issue with the game that a lot of people complain about is the weapons. They are way too weak. The enemies are way too spongy. It's tough to call a game Size Matters when your big ass weapons don't do any damage. Like the enemies don't even flinch. So I definitely understand the complaint there. And also the bolt economy in this game is probably the worst we've ever seen. It takes several playthroughs of challenge modes to get all of your weapons, or to even get the rhino, which for some reason is 10 million bolts. I don't know what they were thinking there. The story is also really bad and doesn't make sense at all. I'm not even going to go into detail with the story because at this point I think we all know the story. It's just almost non-existent. This game is fun though, it's just very tedious, and I think that's kind of its overall downfall. Not to mention the whole shrink ray thing was kind of just used for grind rail sections to open doors, and I feel like it was kind of a missed opportunity. There are the levels that require it, but it doesn't actually change any gameplay. And before I forget to mention this, the final boss in this game is so stupid difficult. and that is another reason everybody hates it. Even with all the flaws that this game has, I'd still give the game a D tier with a score of 5 out of 10. Alright, next up we got a good one here. Ratchet & Clank Tools of Destruction. Tools of Destruction is the first game in the franchise where we got to see our favorite Lombax in high definition. That's right, guys. We are finally on to HD Ratchet & Clank. This game completely rewrites the feel of the entire Ratchet & Clank games. The movement feels smoother, the weapons feel completely different, you have entirely new weapons, there are 0 returning weapons in this game. It's just a fresh take on the franchise after having PS2 game after PS2 game after PS2 game with kind of similar weapons and some returning in each game. The environments are also very beautiful in this game as they expand on the whole HD functionality. This game has a lot of new gadgets and playstyles introduced as well. We get things like the Decryptor, Robo Wings, and Gyrocycle, which use the PS3 6-axis feature, which the only reason I think this is really cool is because you have the option to turn it off. Thank you, Insomniac. There are also arena sections, much needed Clank section improvements, and the return of ship missions. Although, they kind of just turn the ship missions into auto-scrollers, which is a huge letdown. We get introduced to a lot of characters who make a return in the future trilogy, such as the Smuggler and Ratchet's canonical girlfriend, Talwyn Apogee, alongside her robot companions Kronk and Zephyr, who become very beloved characters throughout the future trilogy. We also get a side villain arc with Captain Slag and Rusty Pete, which is an awesome addition to the game, but I feel like it takes too much attention away from the main villain. The story for this game is pretty good as we get introduced to our new villain that I was just mentioning, Emperor Percival Tachyon. He wishes to destroy Ratchet and wipe out the Lombax race in its entirety for what they did to the Kragmites. Tachyon being the last Kragmite and Ratchet being the last Lombax is a cool addition to the story and I think worked really well. I just think it's kind of stupid that they threw Angela being a Lombax like right just out of existence. They just whoop, gone. Later in the story, we find out that the Kragmites were not vaporized, they were actually just moved by the Dimensionator, as were the Lombaxes. Ratchet is given the opportunity to go to the Lombax dimension and live freely with his kind, but Ratchet actually refuses this as he doesn't want his life to change how it is now, and especially not with Tachyon still around. So Ratchet defeats Tachyon, and during the celebration, Clank is kidnapped by these Zoni creatures that Ratchet did not even believe existed until like 90% through the game. And this leads directly to the plot of the next 2 games. I like this game a lot. People tend to compare it a little bit too closely to the PS2 games, which is where a lot of the hate comes from, but I think it needs to be classified as its own unique experience. It is a great new addition to the franchise and is an awesome start to the future trilogy's story. I rate this game a high B tier with a score of 7.5 out of 10. Oh boy, alright, next up is Secret Agent Clank. Now, everybody calls this game the worst in the franchise, even more so than Size Matters, and to some degree, I do understand. But I would say that Size Matters and Secret Agent Clank are kind of interchangeable in their own way. Secret Agent Clank has more unique gameplay options, but you guys know how I feel about that. They get very repetitive the more you have, and they tend to go on for way too long. These gameplay features include the obvious Clank sections, alongside Gadgetbot sections, Ratchet Prison Arena sections, Rhythm sections, and even Quark sections, which vary in playstyles, which is very interesting. During my first playthrough, I didn't mind any of these sections as they were a fresh change in scenery for me, but there were a lot that just went on for a little too long. Also, personally, I really wish there were more Clank missions, since the overall game is meant to be about Clank. The story of the game is definitely the worst in the franchise. Ratchet, who is being mind-controlled, steals the Gem of Infinity, which sounds like something straight out of Avengers Infinity War. Clank then has to rescue Ratchet using his amazing secret agent skills. He chases down many different enemies who ends up leading to who actually stole the gem, which was Clunk, aka the worst fight in the franchise. Even worse than Size Matters boss. It was cool seeing Clank have all these different kind of weapons, but overall I really feel like they weren't that powerful. They were definitely better than Size Matters. The enemies were not as spongy, but the weapons overall, there wasn't enough variety, so it was hard to do damage to bosses specifically, which I think is the reason Clank was such a hard boss fight. Overall, I did have a fun time with this game, but I think I have to give it the exact same rating as Size Matters. As I said, they are interchangeable. So Secret Agent Clank is going to be a D tier with a score 5 out of 10. Ratchet & Clank Quest for Booty. I really don't have a lot to say about this game, to be honest, and it's because there's not a lot to say. This is a side adventure that takes place immediately after Tools of Destruction. It has 7 weapons that return from Tools of Destruction, and there's really no unique game modes. Instead, they kind of just threw in some puzzle aspects alongside with the combat to accommodate for this. There isn't even a ship to fly to the other planets in the game. It all takes place in one little area on like 5 different islands or something like that. Story is basically about Ratchet and Talon looking for Clank since he has been captured by the Zoni. After being shot out of a cannon by Rusty Pete, they land on an island inhabited by Fongoids. And after helping the Fongoids, we locate an obsidian eye, which can help us communicate with Clank and try to find where he is. Unfortunately, the eye is missing the Fulcrum Star, which is crucial to power it. So we end up going to a bunch of different islands looking for the Fulcrum Star, and we locate the remains of Dark Water, which I guess is like the villain of this game. And then, yeah, he comes back from the dead, yada yada yada. We kill him, we get the Fulcrum Star, and return to the Eye. We then see where Clank is being held, which leads us directly to the next game in the franchise. This game doesn't really need to exist and can be entirely skipped. It's not bad though. 6 out of 10. Let's give it a C tier. Now we move on to Ratchet & Clank Future: A Crack in Time. Now, I'm going to be very short and sweet with this one. Everybody loves this game, and for good reasons. This game is simply amazing. This game has amazing weapons, including 3 that can be completely customized with completely different mods found throughout the game. This game also features the best Clank sections in the franchise, along with the return of everyone's favorite villain, Dr. Nefarious. And his appearance in this game's story is actually tasteful and fitting, unlike the most recent titles in the franchise. The levels in this game are very expansive and beautiful, even more so than the 2 games before it. This game really capitalized on what the PS3 is truly capable of. Ship missions also make a return, but they also add an open world ship exploration, along with little moons that you can interact with and collect things on. It's freaking amazing. So you have these little moons plus your planets. It's so much content in one. Ratchet also meets a fellow Lombax Azimuth. I mean, I could go on and on, but this game gets enough praising, and for a good reason. So I'm not going to take too much of your time talking about it. I don't even need to talk about the story. I mean, it's easily the best in the franchise. It has twists, emotion, character development. I mean, it literally has everything. This game is an easy S-tier Ratchet & Clank game, and I'm going to give it a 9.5 out of 10. For personal preference, though, it's going behind Going Commando. Alright, we are now moving on to All for One, and god dang, do I need a haircut. Ratchet & Clank All for One is such an interesting title, because if it comes down to the single-player experience overall, then it would significantly lower my ranking and my views of the game. But since I was able to play it with 2 of my friends, my experience was a lot more enjoyable. All for One is the first spin-off title for the Ratchet & Clank franchise on PS3. This game was focused on 4-player cooperative play and did a really good job at that. It had a lot of unique gadgets and features like the vacuum gadget to suck up and collect critters, or to shoot your friends to further sections in the level, or to shoot them off the edge, which is what I did. We also got benefits of using the same weapons, like the combustor. If you all shoot it at the same time, it starts to shoot faster and faster, and then ends in a huge explosion, which deals a lot of damage, which I thought that was a really unique idea and kind of incentivizes you to use the same weapons. This game also had a unique weapon for each playable character, and also Nefarious is a playable character, which is automatically extra bonus points for the game. Overall, I think this game is very fun, but it definitely has some issues. To balance having several different players, they tend to make enemies spawn for what seems like forever. Especially on that one ice level. If you guys played the game, you know which one I'm talking about. And it just ends up being really, really tedious to take them out. This game is also insanely long. All for One is without a doubt the longest Ratchet & Clank game in the entire franchise, clocking in at around 10 hours for an average player to just beat the main game. That is not including any extra content. I'm not really going to talk about the story because, to be brutally honest, I don't actually remember what was happening in the story. I was kind of just having a fun time. So the story probably wasn't very memorable. Overall, I did have a really good time with this game, and I would give it a 6.5 out of 10, which is a C tier. Full Frontal Assault is another multiplayer game in the franchise, but this time it's only meant for 2-player co-op. This game was released to celebrate the 10-year anniversary of Ratchet & Clank, which is kind of meh. This game is basically like the Siege mode in Up Your Arsenal, but it's kind of its own thing now. And I really don't have much to say here. The story is extremely stupid, but the game overall is fun. We use bolts to create defenses to defend our base. While our base is not being attacked, we gather weapons from the weapons pods and attack the enemy base. The main enemy base is protected by nodes that we have to take out first. The nodes are basically just a few enemies that then lead to a bolt crank, which then open up the main base. There are only 4 levels in this entire game, with one of them being a revisit. And after beating those, it's basically just a boss stage, which is very easy, and the boss is really, really easy as well. This game was definitely made to be the most replayable game in the franchise, but I feel like if you don't have another person, it's not quite that fun to play again. But as long as you have a friend, I think it's a fun time. And yeah, aside from the 2012 memes, I think this game is actually pretty okay. The weapons were fun, the enemies were unique, although very spongy. But overall, I think it was pretty good. We're gonna throw it in C tier with a 6 out of 10. Alright, next up we have Into the Nexus. Into the Nexus is an awesome entry in the franchise, but it's unfortunately very short, only including 5 planets, which is what is going to affect this ranking the most. Even though this game is short, it is extremely action-packed and has a lot going on. We start off by losing our beloved friends, Kronk and Zephyr, RIP. We then get an awesome rift tether thing, which allows us to move between certain rifts, but not like the one in Rift Apart. We also get new mechanics like the jetpack, which allows Ratchet to fly around in an open sandbox area, which is really, really fun and something we have been waiting years to be able to do. Unfortunately, we are limited on fuel, but there are charging stations in certain areas. And the other unfortunate part about this is that you can only fly in certain areas of the level. There are no fly zones and fly zones, so it is limited, but it's still really, really fun. The Clank sections in this game are wild as well. It's like a side scroller and you can move in any direction you want. I like it because it's very unique and it's very unlike most Clank missions. The arena in this game is also one of the best in the franchise. And I don't really know why, I just really, really like how they did the hover boot missions, the jetpack missions, and the whole arena was just really nice. The story has something to do with Neftin and Vendra Prague taking the Dimensionator and looking for the Nethers. Honestly, I didn't really pay attention to the story, but they end up getting a bunch of Nethers to come out and try to murder Ratchet. I really don't know. It was kind of forgettable. Enough said though, even though this game is short, it is still a really fun time. High C tier, 7 out of 10. Next up we have Ratchet & Clank Before the Nexus. This is going to be short and sweet. This game is an endless runner like Subway Surfers, and it's a direct prequel to Into the Nexus. There is no new content in this game or any lore related to the Ratchet & Clank franchise. It's just here to be a time waster like most mobile apps. I like the addition of the weapon combat that this game added to the Endless Runner franchise. But other than that, it's kind of just here. Not to mention, you can't even play it anymore. It was taken off the App Store a little bit after it was released. Overall though, with all the new additions to the Runner franchise and just the fact that it's Ratchet & Clank, I am going to give it a 5.1 out of 10. But it's also really hard to consider it a real Ratchet & Clank game, so it's kind of a gray area. Voiceover Ninja here. I take it back. Let's give it a 4 out of 10. It is definitely the worst game in the franchise because it's not a real game. Again, it is a gray area. Alright, Ratchet & Clank 2016. This game was a tie-in with the Ratchet & Clank movie, which was loosely based off of the 2002 game with the same name. I say loosely because the entire story was changed, and not in a good way. Most of my negative ranking from this game will be because of the story. I really don't like that in this game, Ratchet & Clank kind of just meet, and they're already like best friends. There really wasn't any character development. And there's really not that much expression when they're talking to each other. I do not like the new Galactic Rangers. They are even more useless and less memorable than the Ouya Galactic Rangers, who are literally just nameless robots. And I really do not like that all of the jokes in this game feel extremely forced and do not land, like, ever. Maybe 1 or 2 decent jokes here and there. And let's be completely honest, this whole, let's make Dr. Nefarious betray Drek and be the main villain is just complete awful fan service that none of us asked for and none of us appreciated. This game also removed a lot of the original levels from the game that we were hoping for an HD remake, like Orxon, Gemlik, Altanis. All these awesome levels were unfortunately cut, which is a huge letdown for longtime fans. Now, I know all I've said was negative stuff so far. Let's move on to what's actually good about this game, because there are some good things about this game, believe it or not. This game was released on the PS4 and had some amazing graphics because of it. This game is visually stunning in every way imaginable. It's so refreshing to see all these levels from the first game remade into these glorified masterpieces. I mean, every level is just beautiful. So beautifully crafted. You can definitely tell that the team went crazy for the graphics of this game. The game's combat was also some of the best in the franchise visually and was really fun overall with all the weapon variety that this game had. Although most of them were weapons from other games, there was the addition of the proton drum and the pixelizer, which were really awesome, and the pixelizer is easily my favorite weapon in the game. The artifact is so cool and the weapon is so busted. I'm so happy it made it to Rift Apart. Unfortunately, this game doesn't have any new and unique features when it comes to actual gameplay, but it does bring back a few things like ship missions and the jetpack sections from Into the Nexus, which is always a welcome feature. Overall, I think this game was one of the most fun games to replay just due to the graphics and gameplay. That is until Rift Apart came out and outdid this game both visually and gameplay wise. This game is still a good Ratchet & Clank game though, as long as you skip all of the story, because the story is so bad. This game is an easy B-tier Ratchet & Clank game though, with a score of 7.5 out of 10. And for personal preference, I will put it below Tools of Destruction. And last but certainly not least, guys, Ratchet & Clank Rift Apart, without a doubt in my mind, is just amazing. Rift Apart is the most recent game in the franchise, as you guys know, and is also one of the best Ratchet games we've had in over a decade. This game features the most amazing graphics we've ever seen, as well as some amazing and expansive levels to just continue complementing the power of the PS5 and the PC respectively. This game introduces the brand new character Rivet, who is a female Lombax with way too much Rule 34 art. I mean, you guys seriously need to calm down. Rivet is the dimensional counterpart to Ratchet, meaning no, they cannot date, that would just be weird. But anyways, she does play exactly the same as Ratchet, which I know a lot of people didn't like, but I think this was simply done just so her sections don't feel tedious and different than Ratchet's, which makes her more likable of a character because it doesn't take you away from the Ratchet gameplay because it's the same gameplay just with a different character. If that makes sense, it's kind of hard to explain, but I was perfectly okay with her gameplay being the same as Ratchet's. This game also introduces Kit as Clank's counterpart, but her inclusion is mainly just for the story. She only has one mission and it's the same as a Clank mission. Also, speaking of the story, this story is really good. It's not the best in the franchise, but it's definitely the best story since Kraken time. The combat in this game is also some of the most fun combat in gaming as a whole, especially in 2021. We have an insanely huge arsenal of weapons in this game, and for the first time in a long time, 80% of them are entirely new weapons to the franchise. Oh, but of course they had to bring the Agents of Doom back, my least favorite weapon. Come on, Insomniac. We also get the Phantom Dash move, which allows us to move in any direction. This allows us to have some insane evasion skills during combat, having us move left, right, forward, dodging all the bullets like you're in the freaking Matrix. It's so cool. Overall, this game has a lot of really fun and refreshing new features to make this one of the most fun games in the franchise. I mean, I don't see how this can't be a solid 10 out of 10. Oh wait, it has Glitch. For anybody who does not know Glitch, Glitch is the most annoying character I have ever heard in any video game ever. If her missions were not skippable, I would literally give this game an instant C tier. I hate her so much. If she shows up in the next game, I'm going to be so upset. Luckily, the missions are skippable. And yes, that does indeed give this game a very high A tier ranking, with a solid 9.2 out of 10. This is definitely on my top 5 list. And if you have not played this game, please do yourself a favor. Play it. It is the best game we've had in so long. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, please be sure to like and subscribe. And let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree with my list? Do you disagree with my list? And if you don't agree with my list, what would you change about the list? Other than obviously putting Secret Agent Clank in S tier.